Let's get one thing straight right away. College admissions is not broken, right? It's not this chaotic, unfair mess that randomly decides who gets in and who gets ghosted. No, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that design, it's built to filter people out. Top schools aren't struggling to find qualified applicants. They're overwhelmed with them. Everyone applying has strong grades, solid test scores, and tons of activities. So their real job is to, find the best, but before we get to that point, is to figure out who not to admit. And doing that as efficiently as possible. So when your application lands on someone's desk, or more likely their screen, they're not sitting there rooting for you. They're scanning, looking for anything that might make them think, nope, not this one. This could be an awkward sentence in your essay, an extracurricular that feels fake, or even a tone that just feels off. Sometimes that's all it takes to get cut. And that's what people don't get. This isn't a talent show where you're trying to dazzle them, right? It's more like a security clearance. Because no matter how impressive you are, none of it matters if they find a reason to say no before they even finish reading. Most students walk into this process thinking colleges are hunting for brilliance. Like if you just have enough leadership roles or write a deep enough essay, they'll fall in love with you, right? But that's not how it works. Colleges, especially the top ones that you might be interested in, don't start by asking, who should we admit? They start by asking, who can we eliminate first? That's their first job because the volume is insane. Even top schools like Harvard or Stanford are getting 50,000 plus applicants every single year, and they need a way to cut through the noise. So they're not looking for someone who's impressive first. They're looking for risk, red flags, anything that might be a liability. And that could be anything from a sudden dip in grades to a weird vibe in your essay, or even activities that just don't match your story. I've talked to former admissions officers who said flat out, if something feels off, even a little, it's safer to just move on. Think of it like TSA at the airport. They're not evaluating your vacation itinerary. They're just checking for anything that might make you a threat. You don't get on the plane until you actually clear security. Admissions kind of works in a similar way. You don't get evaluated for potential until they're sure you're safe to say yes to. And here's what students don't actually see throughout this process. Your application isn't read start to finish like a story. It's processed like triage in an emergency room. First, it goes to a regional reader, someone assigned to your high school or area. They have maybe 10 to 15 minutes per file, tops. Some schools, it might actually be less. They're gonna be skimming your transcript, clicking through activities, reading the first few lines of your essay, and if it's interesting, read all the way through. And if something catches their eye in a bad way, it's over. They tag it, move on, right? But if it survives that first pass, it goes to a committee. Now you've got 5 or 6 people discussing your file, but here's the twist. Most of them haven't read the entire application. They're hearing it secondhand from the regional rep who gives a good summary of your application. That summary becomes your whole entire application. If that summary has even a hint of doubt, you're done. No discussion, no defense, no chance to explain, not because they're being unfair, right? But because they're moving fast. They don't have the time to move slow. It's not personal, it's just purely logistical. They have to process thousands of applications in literally weeks. You're not gonna be judged like a person until you actually prove you're not a risk for their institution. So again, in the beginning, it's not really about shining. It's about surviving that first round. Now, this is the part that no one really talks about, right? The actual reasons people get rejected. It's rarely because someone was bad. Because if it was their GPA or SAT or extracurriculars, it would be pretty clear and I would understand why. But I remember an applicant who had insane stats. 1550 SAT, ranked first in their class, tons of awards and pretty decent extracurriculars. But their essay, it was full of phrases like ever since I was a child and I have always been passionate about, like all that stuff can be written by literally anyone. There's nothing wrong with it technically, but there was no voice. It felt safe and it felt, very generic. Another student wrote a whole essay about leadership, right? But never actually gave an example of leading anything. It was just abstract statements like true leaders inspire change and I wanted to be like that. You read that, right? And you're like, okay, but what did you do? So a great exercise for you to do if you have an essay currently is to read through it and think from the admissions officer's perspective and think, okay, what kind of questions would they think as they read through that essay? And when you have those guiding questions in your head, you can then change your essay to answer those questions in real time. Sometimes people get rejected because their app feels like it's trying too hard or not hard enough, or sometimes just confused. So the question is, how do you actually remove those red flags? Now, you don't need to reinvent yourself, right? You just need to tighten your story. First, your application needs internal consistency. If you say you're passionate about neuroscience, but none of your activities even remotely relate to that, that's a red flag. That doesn't mean you need to start a neuroscience club right away. It just means you have to align your narrative. Second, your essay should sound like a person, not a personal brand. You don't have to trauma dump or try to be poetic. Just be specific, honest, and real about yourself. Write something only you could have written because that's what actually makes it memorable. No one can be a better you than you. Third, own your gaps. If there's something that might raise a question, like a C in sophomore year chemistry, do not ignore it. Explain it, but don't put excuses just to justify. If something external happened for you to get that bad grade, then explain yourself. But if it was simply just because you weren't able to perform or you were being lazy, that's completely on you. Lastly, make sure everything connects, not perfectly, but clearly, so that the admissions officer can read your entire application and think, okay, this person is XYZ student given the essays, extracurriculars, course curriculum, etc. Your activities, your rec letters, your essays, they should all support the same general idea of who you are and how you think. Because when your application makes sense, it feels solid. And when it feels solid, they don't have to spend time wondering what's missing. And if they're not wondering, they're not reaching for that reject button. At the end of the day, admissions isn't only about who's the smartest or the most involved or even the most accomplished, right? It's about who's the easiest to say yes to. And those three things that I've just previously mentioned can be part of that. But is that the only way? I wouldn't say so. And the way you become that person is to take away all their reasons to say no. You don't have to be a perfect student, but you have to be a clear one, a believable one. That means no fake polish, no disconnected activities, no essays that sound like they were AI generated or edited into oblivion. Just a real person with a coherent story that makes sense. That's how you win this game. You don't force them to notice you, you just make it hard for them to ignore your application. So if you're trying to implement all this that I just talked about and want guidance, whether it's storytelling, application strategy, or just someone to help you see your blind spots, Inspirate Consulting is exactly for that purpose, which you can find in the first link in the description. And if you're just here to learn, that's great too. Everything I share here is completely for free, right? Because students deserve to know how this game is actually played. Now, if this helped, drop a like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and go build an application they can't reject, even if they wanted to. All right, good luck. Peace.